Good morning, everyone. Let's do a Monday morning recap of last night's Bible study. I'm going to read to you Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 through 13. If you get a chance and you have a Bible nearby, go ahead and pause this, get your Bible, read along with me. I read out of the New King James Version. Exodus chapter 12. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, On the 10th of this month every man shall take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of persons. According to each man's need, you shall make your count for the lamb. Verse 5, Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. And we're going to look at that. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat. Then they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire. That's another key point. Roasted in fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat it raw nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire, its head with its legs and its entrails. You shall let none of it remain until morning, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. And thus you shall eat it with a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. So you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So that's where we get the name of this practice, this yearly practice. It's also called Pesach in the Hebrew, but it's the Lord's Passover, verse 12. For I, this is God speaking, for I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. I will execute man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. That's another key thought that we're going to look at in a moment. I am the Lord. Now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I, the Lord, see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So let's go over some highlights. First of all, this is a new beginning for the people of Israel, and we see that in verses 2 and 3 when he talks about the month Nisan being the first month of the year to you. So this is the new beginning in the life of the people of Israel who have been in bondage in Egypt, for over 400 years. So it's a new beginning. Then he says, take a lamb. There's the saga or the drama of the lamb that's played out throughout biblical history. Let's go back to the beginning. When Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, they sinned against God. They ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then God removed them from the garden, put an angel with the flaming sword to guard the entrance to the garden so that they could never return again. When they sinned, they discovered that they were naked. This self-discovery and self-awareness through this tree of knowledge of good and evil became evident to them. They discovered their nakedness. So God, when he removed them from the garden, also gave them skins of animals to clothe them, to cover them, because at that point their nakedness was their shame. There's no proof of this, so this is all conjecture on my part, but my belief is the animal he chose to cover the nakedness of Adam and Eve was the lamb. Now we move a little further in the story of Genesis. We find that Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain was a tiller of the ground. He was a gardener, for lack of a better word. That was Cain. Abel was a shepherd. That's why I believe that the animal that was used to clothe Adam and Eve most likely was a sheep or even a lamb, their skin becoming their covering. Because out of all the animals that Abel could have shepherded or could have herded, because there's lots of different animals throughout the out the landscape that he could have chose, but he chose to be a shepherd of sheep. And I believe that is because there was this institution of a lamb dying for the guilt and the sin of mankind. How do I draw that one comparison towards the other? How do I just use this base idea of Cain and Abel being a shepherd, to go back and cast a light of thought and say, well, I believe Abel was a shepherd of sheep because I believe the animal God used to cover Adam and Eve was a lamb. Because then we go further. So then we enter not the general story of humanity, but the specific story of Abraham. And we go to Genesis 22, where Abraham is taking his son Isaac to offer him on Mount Moriah. Now, Mount Moriah is where the Dome of the Rock, the Muslim mosque, sits today. It's where Abraham went to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice back in the day. I think we discovered last night 1200 BC, something of that nature. So Abraham goes to offer Isaac on Mount Moriah as God had told him. Now, that offers some discussion for people that want to say, see, God was all for human sacrifice. The truth is, God is not for human sacrifice. That was a test of the faith of Abraham to trust God implicitly in every aspect of the life of his son and the promises that God had made, that Abraham would have such a heritage that his seed would number the stars of the sky and the grains of sand, right? That's how many of his progeny he would have. That's how many of his lineage that would come into being. And because we know God doesn't ask for or honor human sacrifice in the sense that people want to do that, because Isaac is never offered. So as they're going up the mountain, though, Isaac, who's 16, 17, somewhere in the mid upper teenage years, is walking with Abraham, his father, who's 100 plus years old. And Isaac asks Abraham as they're going, he says, okay, we have the knife and we have the wood and we have the fire, but where is the lamb? So Abraham says God will provide himself a lamb. And as the story goes on, as Abraham has Isaac on the altar ready to sacrifice him, probably beyond understanding, but just trusting God that this is going to work out okay, God stops him and says, okay, over in the thicket there's a ram, and then he hears the rustling of the ram, and he then takes the ram, takes Isaac off the altar, put the ram on the altar, and there's the sacrifice, okay? So God never has welcomed human sacrifice. He did test Abraham, but he did not accept it because he did not allow it. So there's your argument. But let's connect the dots again. So Adam and Eve sin, they're clothed with the skin. No proof in Bible text that it is a sheep or a lamb, but I believe it is. We move forward a little further, and we see that Cain and Abel exist, and Abel is a shepherd of sheep. I believe sheep became very important, and lambs were very important religiously, theologically, to these people groups. So then we come to Genesis 22, and Abraham is taking Isaac up the mountain, and what is he going to offer on the altar? A lamb. So then we move forward a little further in the story of the people of Israel, and we find this passage, Exodus chapter 12. Once again, the saga of the lamb continues. And it's each piece of truth adds to the next layer. It layers the truth so that we find now the all importance of the lamb in the life of the Jewish people and in the life of humanity, because Adam and Eve represent all of humanity, and Abraham, Isaac, and Moses represent Jewish ethnicity within the structure of humanity. So it's amazing. And so you study these things out, and you begin to grow in your understanding of the importance of the lamb. Okay, and that's going to come in key at the end of this talk. So it's a new beginning. Then they're told to offer it. Oh, and then they say, okay, what kind of lamb is it? It's a lamb without blemish and without spot. So there's no sickness, there's no injury. This is a whole, pure, innocent lamb of the first year. So it's not 1 year old yet. It's within that first year. It's young, innocent, pure, and without blemish, without spot, without sickness, without disease, without injury. And it's perfect in every way that a lamb can be perfect. But I like the phrase that if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of persons. I'm still struggling with what all that means, but here's the one conclusion I've drawn. The household is never too much for the lamb, but the lamb could be greater than what the household needs. In other words, the blood of the lamb that's going to be shed is always more than sufficient for what that home will need. That's just an interesting thought and a wonderful thought. Now, so for 4 days, they keep the lamb, they watch it, they make sure it's not in any way blemished or sickly. Then they, at twilight, according to verse number 7, they cut the throat of the little lamb and empty that blood into a basin, and then take hyssop branch, which is found later on in the text here that we won't read, and they use the hyssop to apply the blood to the door, the lintel, which is the door frame over the top, and then to both sides, okay? So the blood is shed, the blood is applied, and it's done at twilight. When is twilight? That is when the sun is setting. So they're literally performing this sacrifice and shedding this blood and applying it to their home at the end of one day and the beginning of another day. It's a beautiful representation of leaving the past behind and entering a new era of life, a new path in life, if you will. So then, the other thought, and we got to go quickly because my time is up, but then they are supposed to roast the lamb in fire. Fire throughout the Bible represents judgment. Look at Sodom and Gomorrah as a picture of the judgment of God coming with fire and brimstone. Fire represents judgment, and it consumes whatever it comes in contact with. But it does represent judgment. And he tells them, you shouldn't boil it or cook it in any other way. You need to roast it with fire. There has to be this picture of judgment being poured out on the lamb whose blood has been shed and applied. Then the judgment falls on that little lamb. This is all pictorial of what God is doing to save humanity, as we'll see in just a moment. Final thought before we get done. And then he says in verse 12, I'm going to come through the land of Egypt, and I'm going to strike dead all the firstborn in the land, both of human family and of the animal kingdom, because there is a distinction between the two. He says of both man and beast. And in doing this, I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt. And now take the time at some point and look at all the different gods of Egypt, and then look at all the different plagues that God sent on Egypt. And God was demonstrating his omniscience and omnipotence in light of these false gods and how they were powerless when God came to send the plagues. They couldn't stop the hand of God. And he used their own gods and turned their own theology, if you will, against them and their worship of these false gods. And each of the plagues represents God showing his omnipotence in light of the gods that the Egyptians worshipped. It's a powerful picture. Finally, he says, when I will pass through the land, God is saying this. And he says, if I see your household and it has the blood on it, I will pass over you, and the plague will not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So here's the point. As you read Bible text and you go from Old to New Testament, you find that the saga of the Lamb continues in the person of Jesus Christ, who is introduced to the world as the Lamb of God to take away the sin of the world. And then this has all been a pictorial representation of the person of Jesus and his story of him coming, being the innocent lamb, being the firstborn, shedding his blood, the blood then being applied to us, that we are washed clean from our sin, and that when God comes to judge the world, which Egypt is a representation of the world, and Pharaoh is a loose representation of Satan in the world, a ruler within this world, but not stronger or greater than the God of the people of God, the people of Israel, or in our case, the people of the Word. All these pictures and all this symbolism plays out in the life of Jesus. And so you just need to see that Jesus' blood is what keeps us from death and gives us life, and that he shed his blood that we might be born again. Listen, I wish I had more time, but that's the highlights from last night. Hope it's a blessing. God bless.